In today's presentation, I will be discussing the 2020 SolarWinds data breach. Today's agenda includes a summary of the breach, attack description, its impact, and the remediation steps taken. SolarWinds, an IT management company known for its network and systems monitoring software, fell victim to a supply chain attack in 2020. The breach targeted SolarWinds' widely used Orion software, which was compromised with malicious code. This malicious code was then distributed through regular software updates, which were trusted and installed by SolarWinds customers. The attack was first discovered in late 2020 by FireEye, a cybersecurity firm, now known as Mandiant. Upon investigation, it was determined that this sophisticated attack was conducted by a group identified as APT29, also known as Cozy Bear. This group is believed to be linked to the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation, also known as Russian SVR, indicating a state-sponsored operation. This attack was unprecedented in both scale and impact, targeting some of the most sensitive institutions in the United States. As Microsoft President Brad Smith described it, it was the largest and most sophisticated attack the world has ever seen. The breach affected more than 425 of the US Fortune 500 companies, including tech giants like Microsoft and Cisco. It didn't stop there. The breach also impacted all 5 branches of the US military, as well as the Department of Defense, the NSA, and other defense agencies. Even the Office of the President of the United States was affected. Other sensitive agencies compromised in the attack included the State Department, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security. At the time, SolarWinds reported that around 300,000 customers had downloaded the compromised updates. Subsequent analysis revealed that the malware was successfully activated on approximately 18,000 systems. Between 50 to 100 of these customers were specifically targeted for further attacks. While we have confirmation that these agencies were compromised, the exact nature of the data accessed remains largely undisclosed, leaving many questions unanswered regarding the full extent of the breach. One notable disclosure was that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security's email account was breached, raising concerns about the exposure of sensitive government communications. It was revealed that 3% of Microsoft 365 email accounts at the US Department of Justice were also breached, and that attackers were able to access 80% of email accounts belonging to employees at the US Attorney's offices in Eastern, Northern, Southern, and Western districts of New York. Here's the timeline of events. In September 2019, the attackers gained access to the SolarWinds network. Over the next 6 months, they carefully plan and test their ability to inject malicious code into Orion. By February 2020, they successfully insert the SUNBURST malware into Orion software. It consists of over 4,000 lines of malicious code. Just 1 month after, in March 2020, this compromised version is made available for customers to download and install. From March to June 2020, the malware runs undetected, collecting valuable data for the attackers. By June 2020, the attackers removed the malware from Orion, possibly because they had sufficient data or because they were fearing detection. By this stage, they have attained the credentials needed to target systems, so they transitioned to the second stage of the attack. This was a more targeted attack on a limited number of organizations, and it persisted for several months. Finally, in December 2020, FireEye discovers the breach, triggering a full-scale investigation. In January 2021, investigators attribute the attack to Russian state-sponsored actors. The exact method the attackers used to infiltrate SolarWinds' network is still unclear. However, one common theory is that they may have exploited a credential that was accidentally published in a public repository. Once inside, the attackers inserted malicious code into SolarWinds Orion software updates. This malware, known as SUNBURST, was the core of the breach. To accomplish this, the attackers compromised the software's build process by using a malicious compiler. This meant that when developers compiled their code, the compiler would secretly insert the SUNBURST malware without their knowledge. The compromised update was then signed with a legitimate certificate, making it look like a trusted SolarWinds update. As a result, it's estimated that around 300,000 customers downloaded the infected updates. After installation, SUNBURST stayed dormant for 10 to 14 days before activating. This delay helped the malware avoid detection during the initial phase of the attack. Once activated, SUNBURST scanned its environment to determine if it was running in a production environment or just a sandbox for testing. If it was in production, the malware gathered sensitive information and transmitted it back to the attackers. It's believed that this malware successfully operated in around 18,000 customer environments. To stay under the radar and avoid detection, the attackers used several techniques to make their communications appear legitimate. First, they hosted their command and control, or C2 servers, in US-based public clouds. This made the traffic seem more trustworthy and harder to trace back to the attackers. To add another layer of credibility, the attackers registered the domains for these C2 servers 18 months in advance. This gave them a long-established presence, making the domains look legitimate and reducing the chances of detection. The attackers also made the traffic between the malware and the C2 servers mimic regular Orion traffic. This clever tactic created the illusion that the communications were just part of the normal functioning of the SolarWinds software. To further avoid detection, they assigned a unique C2 server to each targeted organization. This individualized approach made it extremely difficult to detect patterns or link multiple breaches together. Once the malware was activated, it communicated with the attacker's C2 servers, allowing them to remotely issue commands and maintain control over the compromised networks. After gaining this foothold, the attackers moved on to the next phase, launching manual, interactive, and highly customized attacks on their targets. This tailored approach allowed them to maximize the damage and exploit their access in ways specific to each organization. In response to the SolarWinds breach, the US government acted quickly and decisively. First, the breach was officially declared a national security incident, underscoring the scale and seriousness of the attack. To investigate the breach thoroughly, multiple oversight committees, congressional hearings, and joint task forces were established. At the same time, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency issued emergency directives to help organizations mitigate the damage. These directives provided critical guidance on network security and preventing further compromise. The US government later attributed the attack to Russia, specifically linking it to APT29, also known as Cozy Bear, a group associated with the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, or SVR. The US took strong diplomatic and economic measures, including expelling 10 Russian diplomats from the United States, imposing financial sanctions on Russian companies tied to Russian intelligence, and implementing stricter export controls on sensitive technologies going to Russia. Following the breach, SolarWinds faced intense scrutiny from the US government. However, it did not face any direct regulatory or legal action initially, as it was largely viewed as a victim of a nation-state attack rather than being negligent. There was no evidence of negligence or poor security practices, and SolarWinds cooperated fully and swiftly throughout the investigation. However, the company did face legal challenges from investors. In 2022, SolarWinds settled a $26 million class action lawsuit from investors who claimed that the company had overstated its cybersecurity defenses, which they argued contributed to the drop in its stock price. In 2023, the Securities and Exchange Commission found that SolarWinds CISO had failed to adequately disclose the breach to investors. But in 2024, this decision was overturned, clearing SolarWinds of that specific charge. In response to the SolarWinds breach, key regulatory and policy measures were introduced to strengthen cybersecurity. One major step was Executive Order 1402A, which focuses on modernizing federal networks and improving the security of the software supply chain to prevent future attacks. NIST also took action by releasing a special publication on providing guidelines to help organizations assess and manage risks from third-party software and services. In addition, NIST updated both its cybersecurity framework and risk management framework to include specific measures aimed at securing supply chain integrity, further strengthening overall cybersecurity defenses. In response to the breach, SolarWinds took immediate and comprehensive action to secure its network and prevent future attacks. First, SolarWinds issued patches to remove the malicious code from the affected versions of their Orion software, ensuring that any compromised systems were secured. The company then launched a comprehensive security review, overhauling its internal security controls to strengthen its defenses and identify any potential vulnerabilities in its network. To prevent future compromises, SolarWinds improved its software development lifecycle, implementing more robust security practices throughout the software development process to avoid similar issues in the future. This included comparing their source code with the decompiled code. This way, they could be sure that the new update only included the intended code. Following the SolarWinds breach, CISA issued Emergency Directive ED21-01, providing critical steps for federal agencies to contain and mitigate the impact of the attack. The directive required all federal agencies to immediately disconnect or remove any affected SolarWinds Orion software from their networks to prevent further exploitation. Agencies were instructed to conduct a comprehensive inventory of systems running SolarWinds Orion, identify any compromised systems, and assess potential indicators of compromise to understand the breadth of the breach. A thorough forensic analysis was advised to fully assess the compromise, identify the extent of the attack, and collect key evidence for further investigation. Additionally, CISA recommended agencies harden Active Directory, particularly focusing on Kerberos policies and configurations, to strengthen their network security posture and prevent further unauthorized access.